All right, let's get right into the podcast commentary for episode 118. This one's titled, Does Your Spirit Need an Uplift? And I have to tell you, this morning I am feeling kind of tired, not quite all the way fatigued as we discussed in the last couple of episodes, but yeah, I do need an uplift.
Update too, maybe.
Update and an uplift, right?
We need an update and uplift. Well, I thought to do this because it just came to me. It's because we're really spiritual human beings in a body, not where we have a body, therefore we're a spiritual human being. And these last couple of weeks have been quite interesting with the kind of responses I'm getting from people, from students. Anger is the way the planets are lined up with Mars right now, uh, it's sparking some unrest, to say the least. And so I was thinking, does your spirit need an uplift? It was really like, how do we get over the the dialogue that actually causes us not to feel joyful and, hey, let's get started today. What is it? What is the secret to having that inner joy? What is the secret? And the secret is, I said, 5 ways to be stress free no matter what, because stress, let's a perceived threat, or any of these perceptions that our mind creates that are outside of us, create almost like a veil, a shroud is put over our light. It's amazing. When I wake up in the morning, I make it a habit before I sit for my meditation. And sometimes it doesn't, I can see the difference where I don't want to be connected to anything. I don't want to be spoken to. I just want to be quiet because my mind is still in a state of being back home, right? I'm just coming out of sleep and I've been home. And as soon as my mind goes out into conversation or thought, like, oh, what do I have to do today? What happens is my spirit gets shrouded because the thoughts are what create, that course that I'm contemplating doing or not doing, detox your mind. It's really about how do we remove those shrouds of thoughts that really are creating the heaviness that we feel that our spirit can't just illuminate and be radiant. And what is the real secret to that? Well, there are two schools. I don't even want to say two schools. You could either get the people that are so focusing on fitness and the body and the diets, and then you have the others that are focusing on mindfulness and compassion and love. But we have to bring those two and marry them together. And I don't see that very often. We want to marry those two together because you do live in a body with a mind and breath. And the mind can either be inward or the mind can be outward. So, what we're talking about here, when we take the spirit and uplift the spirit, we want to bring the mind back home. That's the essence of it. I mean, that's the easiest way to say it. Bring the mind back home. When you bring the mind back home and you focus on who's doing the thinking rather than the thinking, then your spirit suddenly gets uplifted because you recognize who you are. Once you recognize who you are, the obstacles come and go, but you have equanimity. And that's what we mean by when we say practice.
Sure.
100%
Yeah.
equanimity would be great, equanimity, but how many can really maintain that? And that's the practice. It's easy. You see how emotional you get during the day, and that tells me in myself, I say, how emotional am I for today? And that tells me how much equanimity I have or not. So that's what's really interesting about it.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, we're big Matrix fans, so the analogy I like to use is getting pulled back into the Matrix. Where you're the residual self-image, not your true self, and so you really got to unplug again and figure out when you get sucked back in, and to lift those veils, as you call them, so that you can get back in touch with yourself.
It's interesting you brought up the matrix, and I was so grateful to you to explain to me. I wasn't able to decipher really what was going on with all the technology. And when you said the real self versus the residual self, and I used that in classes for years, and it was so perfect. I gave you credit, of course, because you taught me that. You actually you actually showed me a different way to look at it. Yeah, when you have the mothership and you're there, you're clear, one pointed, and then you have that residual self. And when we get into the residual self of identifying ourselves with all of these titles, and I think it's in Feeling Good Matters again, where I say labels belong on jars. Don't label yourself. Don't even label your disease like, oh, I have asthma, I have this, I have that. No, your body is experiencing it. But don't own it, because when you own it, the cells will start adapting to owning it.
Right.
It's that self versus residual self. So in a spiritual sense, we bring this back to uplifting the spirit. When the spirit is uplifted, it's not identifying with any of those residual titles, for example, or labels. It's just pure. And I was thinking about this yesterday. When we're born, we're this pure light. And I said, what happens? Where do we lose that being? It's a sense of being. I am. Where do we start to lose that center of our spirit?
Right.
Well,
When
yeah,
we get
yeah,
tapped back into the matrix.
right when we get labels.
Yep.
Susie, don't do this. This is good. This is bad. Don't do that. This, say hello, say thank you, say this, do this. We start getting our computer or even our mind. Let's talk about the mind. The mind starts getting programmed. And then if we experience any kind of violence or unpleasantness, that happens a lot, we start to then mold our persona, our personality to deal with that. And everybody deals with that differently based on their own what they've come with in their own package, their own past experiences. So it's amazing. It's all programming. So what we want to do to have that spiritual uplift is we want to come back home. We want to come back home to when we were that sense of just beautiful light. And babies have it. That's why people gravitate towards babies. And we want to just go to that light where we don't have any identification. Oh, I like that person. I don't like that person. Or that's pretty. That's not pretty. That's ugly. That's good. That's bad. That's fun. That's not fun. When we start doing all of that, our spirit it's the veil. We get removed from the actual who we are. And there's some ways that we can work with that. I always say use your body as feedback because you're in a body. You can't, I shouldn't say you can't. I don't even like to use that word. It's much more difficult if you don't have your body in balance to reach that state and to give that spirit an uplift. So it's better to start working now. And it's hard to tell people this: work when your body's healthy. Don't wait for the crisis where you have to look at what is twice. Remember CRISIS. And there was a great healer that actually taught me that word and said, oh, just think about it. You have to look at what is twice. And it's so true. We tell everyone, people come to you after they're so ill. Hey, would you help me with my diet? Well, no, once you get to that point, I don't say no, but once you get to that point of extremeness in disease states, you do need medical intervention. It's much better to start way up in the beginning and establish a balanced way of being so your spirit can be housed in a more healthy environment. And that's what we're talking about. So we have to bring our mind back to home base. We have to learn to regulate that outward movement of mind and go to that inward dimension of ourselves. And that's what meditation is all about.